Hey everyone, it's Dr. Scott. I have some additional thoughts and comments on the selections from Blakesley and Fleischer that address interviews, and I just want to talk about them a little bit. Talk a little bit about the logistics of interviewing, and spend a little bit of time focusing on aligning your interview protocol and the questions that you ask in an interview with your project's research question. That alignment is super important. It's also a way to make sure that you're efficient in your interviews and you're only asking questions that you need answers to, and you're not really on kind of a fishing expedition. So, Blakesley and Fleischer, they talk about, the different kind of interview types, and I think all that stuff is cool, straightforward. You need to learn a lot more about interviews and about qualitative research if this is the route that you want to take for your capstone. I'll mention Creswell anytime anybody asks me, who should I read for qualitative research methods? Jonathan Creswell's work. He's out of the University of Nebraska. He's kind of the guru when it comes to qualitative research, but he's got a lot of great text about that, and making sure that, not just like interviews, but interviews for case studies, interviews for phenomenologies, interviews for, just different kinds of research that you can do, different kinds of qualitative research that you can do. The one that I will mention that Blakesley and Fleischer talked about, and that's the interviews as protocol analysis. That's used quite frequently in our discipline, and it's usually around how students write and revise. So getting them to talk about their process and to talk aloud about what they're doing when they write and revise, that has a pretty long tradition in our discipline. It's something that Dr. Jen Scott and I did with a research project where we talked to students about their revision practices after they've been required to visit a writing center. So that one, protocol analysis, process analysis, getting people to talk about a process, that has a very long tradition in our discipline, and you can find a lot of great research that uses that. Some thoughts about logistics of conducting interviews. I think it's important to conduct an interview in a location that your participant feels safe. Like it feels like it's kind of their home turf. It's like if I was to conduct an interview of a student, doing so in my office might be kind of intimidating. That would probably be a bad idea. But talking to students, getting a conference room and asking them questions there, that might be okay for some students. For other students, it's like, let's meet outside the university center and talk about revision. That can make things a little difficult for recording, and recording is another kind of important logistical thing to think about, how you're going to record and how you're going to get those interviews transcribed. Technology has come a long way when it comes to dictation. There's a feature in Word now where you can dictate to Word what you want it to write. And I've had some students that have had some luck recording on their phone an interview or a TikTok if they're doing a content analysis project, and then playing that back for Microsoft Word. And the dictation isn't that bad. There's some fixing you need to do, but you can generally get most of it through a dictation software. Otter AI is another one, particularly if you want to do interviews over Zoom or Teams or something like that. Otter AI is a plugin that you can get, and it can record a presentation and then spit back a transcript that is pretty dang accurate. So those are some important logistical things to think about. You usually think about those later on down the line, but sometimes it's important to think about, like, okay, where am I going to store these things? When you're putting together your IRB proposal, thinking about how you're going to store your recordings with your participants. Maybe that's something that in your IRB materials you say, I'm going to, once they're transcribed and after I've completed my master's degree program, I'm going to make sure that those are destroyed. I'll make sure that they're deleted permanently. Another important consideration is sampling and making decisions about who you're going to interview for your project. Interview research is very different from survey research. When you conduct survey research, there's a presumption that the project that you're embarking upon is representative of a larger population. So you sample a certain number of folks and say that this is a representative sampling of this larger group that I want to know something about. That's not always the case, and you have to do a bit of explaining to talk about why you are not trying, why you're using a survey and it's not a representative sampling. But a lot of times when folks see survey research, they're saying, okay, they purposefully selected X number of participants because that is a representative sampling of this larger population. We got 3,000 students at Shawnee State University. There is a mathematical formula to figure out which number, how many students you need to survey in order to say you have a representative sampling with a 95% confidence interval. That's the assumption that a lot of folks make when they talk about survey research. In interview research, in qualitative research, that presumption of representativeness goes away. We assume that when you interview 4 people, you are not getting things that you can say that this is representative of this entire group. You get a depth of understanding. You don't get the breadth of understanding. And that's why I love qualitative for some things, and I love quantitative for other things. Like they're tools that help you answer research questions, and they're just better situated for some questions than others. So for qualitative research, if you want to understand somebody's perceptions, you want to get them to describe something, you want to get them to talk through a process, you have to do an interview project. Like I really don't see a way around that. An interview or an observation or a focus group or something like that. If you want to understand what a group thinks, and you want to be able to correlate that with other factors, survey research is the way to go, at least in our discipline. So sampling is a super important thing to think about. Why are you choosing these people to interview for your project? Is there something about their position, their stance, that makes them, that's unique? Are you looking for people that are a typical case of something that you're taking a look at, or are you looking for something unique, a perspective that's unique? So if you're reading Creswell, Maxwell, other folks that do qualitative research, they're going to walk you through a lot of that. But that is a very important thing, and it's something that's addressed by Blakesley and Fleischer in the ethics section of the selection for this week. But it's an important consideration to think about when you are conducting when you're setting up an interview project. If it's interviewing folks at your school, thinking about, which faculty members to interview and why am I going to interview them? Convenience is part of it, but it can't be the only consideration. There needs to be something about their perspective that helps you answer the research question. So those are just some of my thoughts about some general thoughts about conducting interviews in the discipline. Again, if you're going to choose interviewing as part of your method for your project, you're going to want to learn a little bit more about that and kind of refine some of the choices that you make. Blakesley and Fleischer, I think, give you a really good kind of summary of how interviews are conducted in the discipline and how they're used in the discipline. But you're going to want to read the works of others that I think do a better job of getting into not only the nuts and bolts, but also some of the theory and some of the concepts around conducting interviews and qualitative research. I want to focus for a little bit on aligning research questions with your interview protocol. I think anytime you conduct an interview, you want to have an interview protocol, a list of questions that you're going to ask, because you want to be able to ask questions, the same questions of all your participants. You want apples to apples comparisons between your participants and what they say. So when I'm downloading interview transcripts or when I'm analyzing interview transcripts, I will often, get all the responses to question 3, stack those up next to each other, and what trends do I start noticing in there? So using a consistent, stable interview protocol, making that document helpful for yourself, including, like a checklist about did I talk about consent? Did I get their consent for this project? Did I inform them about the purposes of this project? Did I give them information about who they can contact about their rights and things like that? Like giving yourself kind of a checklist of things that you should be doing before every interview. That's one reason why an interview protocol is very helpful. It's also helpful because it keeps you grounded. Interviews can meander. They're good when they meander sometimes. Sometimes you need to nudge them back to the thing that you need to talk about that phenomenon that you're trying to learn more about. But an interview protocol is really good about keeping you kind of honest to what it is you're trying trying to learn about. So definitely, if you're going to use an interview, you're going to have to use an interview protocol. Another reason interview protocol is so important for qualitative research is that it just makes things much more efficient. You can definitely ask, and you should ask, follow-up questions, what they call probes in qualitative research, which I always found a little weird. But you want to ask those probing questions to get folks to talk more, because it's their perspectives, their perceptions of a phenomenon that you're really trying to learn something about. So you want to get them talking about that thing. You want to keep them talking about that thing. So asking good follow-up questions, making sure that you're staying engaged. I don't recommend that you take a lot of notes during your interview. You want to stay engaged with that person, because that's what's going to keep them talking. Your engagement with them, good timely follow-ups, and clear questions, clear open-ended questions in your interview protocol. So key stuff, that interview protocol. I'm not a big fan of doing follow-up interviews. That's something that's mentioned in Blakesley and Fleischer, and I'm not a big fan of that. I think that you should take one shot at asking those questions. Now, there's some methodologies, case studies maybe, ethnographies definitely, where like you're trying to immerse yourself in a culture to understand that culture, like student athletes and their writing and their experiences with writing. Maybe you need to hang out with a sports team and ask them, over an extended period of time, keep asking them different questions about writing and their writing practices. But if you are trying to ask questions of like 12 people about their experience in a required writing center visit, you want to ask all the questions you need to ask the first time that you ask them. And an interview protocol is the way to do that. And in order to get that protocol where it needs to be, breaking down your research question is a super important thing, so that everything that you're asking aligns with that research question. So all your interview questions, they've got some kind of relationship to your research question. So I'm going to switch screens here in a second. We'll be in a Word document, and we're going to talk about a possible research question, and we will think about how we might break that down. And that is the activity that I want you all to do. One of the activities that I want you all to do this week is I want you to come up with an interview protocol that asks questions for that are aligned with your research question. So sit tight. Okay, so this might seem a little extra what we're going to go through here, but this is the process I go through with all students that I mentor in research projects, whether they're in my first year writing course and they want to conduct an interview for a research project, or senior capstone students, and now y'all in a master's degree program. You have a research question. This is the research question. Our practice one. How do master's degree students at a rural public institution describe their writing process? Kind of vanilla, kind of basic, but I think it's going to serve our purposes for this example. What I will do, like if you were in my office, we would switch seats. You would sit in my chair. I would stand at a whiteboard that's across from my desk, and we would go through this process. I would put this up on the board, and then I would ask you, we would go word by word, or phrase by phrase, and I'd ask, like, what do you need to know from your participants to help you understand this part of your research question? So how do master's degree students, I think that would be the first thing that we would take a look at. What would be the things that we would want to know about master's degree students? So student questions, and I want to highlight that in yellow so that I know that it's aligned with what's up here in the research question. Okay, so student questions. What do we want to know about these students? Well, we might want to know, and again, this would be based on the literature. It would be based on something meaningful. You would not want to go on a fishing expedition. Now, if your question was like, how do LGBTQ master's degree students, maybe you're asking questions to understand a little bit about their identity. But, if that's not essential to your research question, then you really shouldn't be asking that stuff. So student questions, you might ask, what is it you want to know about them? What program they're in? How many credit hours they've completed, your research. Let's say you've done some literature review research, and it says something about mentorship practices, and that has some kind of impact on how graduate students think about writing and revising. So maybe so these should be questions here. So you're asking all the kinds of all the questions that you want. You might want to know if they're in an online program, face-to-face program. So all the questions about the master's degree students, like the demographic questions, the students and who they are. Maybe age is important, whether or not they're working. Addition to being a student. Are they a teacher? I mean, you want to ask all the questions. So think about all the demographic questions out of the way with this part of the research question. So we've started here a list of student questions. Next part of the research question, rural public institution. So, questions about their relationship with the institution. So, if this is something that's important to you, and it should be because it's in the research question, then you should be asking some questions about the institution that they're at, why they chose that institution, anything that you can think of that kind of touches upon this. If this is something that's important and essential to your project, and again, it should be if it's in the research question, then you want to ask in your interview protocol different questions that help get at this part of the research question. So, some things to think about. Are you from a rural area? We have some students in our program. If we're thinking about our program and conducting this, this project here, we have some folks that are not from Scioto County or from this area. We have others that are. So you might want to break down, like, are you from a rural area? If so, where? How long have you lived in that area? If it's relevant to the research project, you might ask about high school experience and where they went to high school. So all the questions that have to do about the institution and the things that you want to know, why you selected this institution. If these are relevant to the research question, you need to ask them. If they're not, and you are fishing, maybe you cut that stuff out, and maybe it's not relevant that it's at a rural public institution. But if it's in the research question, the assumption is that it's something that's important, that you want to know something about, so you should be asking questions of your participants about it. Now, the real phenomenon that I think this research question is trying to get at is about the description of the writing process, and that's where you really kind of have to break things down. And this is also where your literature review really makes an impact. So you're able to generate a lot of good questions that help get at this based on your read of the literature. Writing process questions. So being a little familiar with that scholarship, some writing process questions might have to do with incorporating feedback. How are others involved in that student's writing process, or in that student's writing process? The social aspect of writing, and within that, there are different questions that you might ask, like who do you talk to about your writing? What kind of feedback do you appreciate, or do you use, or do you find helpful when you write? When do you ask for feedback? So all the questions that have to do with incorporating feedback, that's part of one part of the literature about the writing process, is that folks ask questions. Writing is not as solitary thing as a lot of folks think. Where do they get that feedback? How do they do that social aspect of writing, of the writing process? So there might be some questions about that. And because description is here, all of these are example. Talk to me about a time where you talked to somebody else about your writing. What was that experience like? What kind of feedback do you find helpful? Give me an example of an assignment where you got feedback, or a creative writing thing that you did, and you workshopped and you got some feedback from somebody. Tell me about that process and tell me what that was like. All of these are asking for examples, and why? Because it's tied to this right here, that word in the research question. Just one more example. Everyone's favorite, procrastination. Procrastination, like, when do you start? So, when do you start a project? And again, example. Do you pre-write? Because maybe they're not actually procrastinating. Maybe they would say that they are, but they're actually doing a lot of cognitive work before they even sit down. So what I'm trying to get at here, it's not really, what are the things in the literature that, what I'm trying to say is that these questions that you ask in an interview protocol, they have to be tied to your research question. There shouldn't be anything in here that you're asking just to see if it's interesting. When you get to this point on a master's degree project and in this kind of scholarship, everything that you're asking is moving the ball forward a little bit. You're trying to get their perceptions, and you're trying to get them talking in a way and about things that help you answer this question that you have. So describe their writing process. So by the time you do this, and again, we could go on and keep talking, and there's a lot of other things we could talk about in terms of writing process, but I hope that this example kind of makes sense. You're taking a research question and you're breaking it down, using your literature review where it makes sense to ask questions of your participants, and make sure that you have everything covered, because you don't want to come back and have to say, oh, I did some more research and I need to ask you more questions about this thing. The literature review should be done, and you should be able to kind of flesh out an interview protocol based on the research question that you have. Okay, that's it. That's going to be it for this video. My apologies if it rambled a little bit, but I hope this helps you all put together your assignment for this week. And anybody that's doing interviews, if I was mentoring you for your thesis project, this is something that we would do. So this is something that I think would help, and should definitely help you with the final project of this class. So that's it for now, and I'll talk to you all soon.